As you drift off to sleep tonight, we'll tell the story of one of the most fascinating people. If our stories help you relax and fall asleep, please subscribe. It would mean the world to us. And now, as you continue to relax, let's begin. Tonight's story is about Tom Brady, the quiet pressure of Tom Brady. Sleep story. The stadium is already emptying, but one light still stays on. It hangs above the locker room tunnel like it forgot to leave, casting a pale glow over polished floors and abandoned tape. Somewhere deeper inside the building, cleats echo softly against concrete, slow and unhurried, as if time itself has loosened its grip. A man stands alone near the edge of the field, where the grass is already starting to recover from the weight of the game. The scoreboard above him is dark now, but its memory still feels present in the air. Tom Brady does not look up at the stands anymore. There is no one left to see him, yet his posture still carries the quiet discipline of being watched. In moments like this, the silence after thousands of voices is louder than the game itself. He slowly removes his gloves, one finger at a time, as if each movement belongs to something larger than habit. The night feels stretched, like it has nowhere else to go. Inside the locker room, the sounds are smaller than they used to be. A metal locker door closes softly. A towel is folded, then unfolded again without urgency. Equipment managers move in and out like shadows that have learned the rhythm of repetition. There is no celebration in this space right now, only the quiet maintenance of what just happened. Victory here does not explode, it settles. He sits down on the bench, not dramatically, but with the careful weight of someone who understands how much the body carries after invisible battles. His helmet rests beside him, slightly scuffed, holding fragments of a game that no longer exists. The air smells faintly of turf and electricity, like every game before it has left a trace. And in this stillness, nothing demands attention, but everything feels important. There is a way silence behaves around certain lives. It does not feel empty. It feels structured, almost trained, as if it has learned to stand at attention the same way the players do. In this moment, even the distant crowd outside the stadium becomes a memory that does not fully fade, just softens at the edges. The night outside continues without interruption, but inside everything slows. He reaches for a water bottle, takes a small sip, and sets it down again. The gesture is ordinary, but the timing feels deliberate, like every action has been shaped by years of repetition. Somewhere in the building, a television still replays highlights from moments he has already lived through 100 times. But in here, there is no replay, only presence. It is easy to imagine that greatness feels loud, that it arrives with noise and stays that way. But in rooms like this, after the final whistle, it is quieter than expected. Not absence of pressure, but pressure that has nowhere left to go. It lingers in the corners of the locker room, in the folds of jerseys, in the way hands rest after removing tape. A coach walks by, says something brief, something unnecessary to repeat. There is a nod in return. Nothing more is needed. These exchanges have been refined over years into something almost minimal, like language has been stripped down to its most functional form. Communication becomes efficient when repetition replaces surprise. Outside, stadium lights begin to dim one section at a time. From inside, it looks like the world is slowly exhaling. Each fading light feels like a chapter closing without announcement. And yet, there is no sense of finality, only continuation disguised as stillness. He stands again, adjusting the strap of his bag. The motion is familiar, almost ritualistic. Every piece of equipment has a place, every movement a sequence learned long before tonight. There is comfort in this structure, even when everything else feels uncertain. Routine becomes something like shelter. In the hallway leading out, the sound changes. Echoes soften. Footsteps become more personal. The building is not empty, but it feels like it is returning itself to silence one corridor at a time. Somewhere behind him, the field remains lit just a little longer, as if reluctant to forget what happened there. And then, without ceremony, he steps into the night air. It is colder outside. Not dramatically so, but enough to remind the body that it has moved from one world into another. The stadium behind him is still large, still monumental, but no longer alive in the same way. It is now an object again, not an experience. Cars move slowly in the distance. People who once shouted are now scattered into their own quiet returns. Moments like this do not announce themselves as meaningful. They do not ask to be remembered. Yet they settle into memory anyway, not as highlights, but as atmosphere. The feeling of standing still after everything has already been decided. He walks toward the team bus, steps measured, steady. There is no rush. There rarely is. Time behaves differently after games like this. It stretches, softens, refuses to divide itself neatly. And in that stretched time, thoughts do not arrive as conclusions. They arrive as fragments. What remains is not the scoreboard, not the final score, not even the statistics that will later be discussed. What remains is the repetition of years that led to this exact moment of silence. The body remembers more than the mind wants to admit. Inside the bus, seats are already half filled with quiet figures. Some stare out of windows, some lean back with eyes closed. The hum of the engine becomes a low, steady rhythm, like a distant heartbeat shared by everyone inside. No one speaks loudly. There is no need to translate what has already been lived. He takes a seat near the window. Outside, the stadium begins to shrink as the bus pulls away. The lights fade into distance, becoming smaller, less defined, until they resemble scattered thoughts rather than architecture. The road ahead is open, but unremarkable, and that too feels appropriate. There is a strange comfort in the repetition of this cycle. Game after game, season after season, not because it becomes easier, but because it becomes familiar in its weight. The mind does not fully relax, but it learns how to carry things without naming them, and somewhere between motion and stillness, between departure and memory, the night continues without interruption. He sits by the window as the bus pulls farther away from the stadium, and the structure that once felt alive with sound slowly becomes just another shape in the distance. The glow from its exterior lights fades into a soft blur against the dark sky, as if the building is dissolving back into the night it was built from. Inside the bus, the hum of the engine steadies everything into a single, continuous rhythm. It is not silence exactly, but something close enough that thoughts begin to move more slowly. Tom Brady leans his head slightly against the glass. The reflection of his own face appears faintly over the passing highway lights, overlapping with streaks of yellow and white. For a moment it is difficult to separate what is outside from what is inside. The road, the glass, the memory of the game, they all feel layered together, like they belong to the same quiet system. No one on the bus is celebrating. That part of the night has already passed somewhere behind them, in a different version of time. What remains now is the slow return to ordinary space. Shoulder pads rest on seats. Jerseys are loosened but still worn, as if no one has fully decided to step out of the identity they just inhabited. The air carries a faint mix of sweat, fabric, and exhaustion that has nowhere urgent to go. Some players scroll through phones without real attention. Others stare forward, eyes unfocused, as if replaying invisible moments that only they can see. Every person here seems slightly suspended between what just happened and what will come next, and yet no one breaks that suspension. It is understood that this in-between space belongs to everyone equally. Outside, the highway stretches in long, unbroken lines. Streetlights pass at steady intervals, marking time without emotion. Each light appears for a second, then disappears behind them, like a thought that arrives fully formed and then dissolves before it can be spoken. The bus moves through them without resistance. He adjusts his hands, still carrying the faint memory of grip and tension from earlier. Even now, the body does not fully release what it has learned. Fingers remember pressure before rest. Shoulders hold shapes that no longer serve a purpose. This is the afterlife of repetition, where physical memory outlasts the moment that created it. Somewhere near the front of the bus, a coach is quietly reviewing notes. Pages turn slowly, not with urgency, but with habit. The sound of paper is almost softer than the engine. There are no dramatic reactions, no visible reassessments, only preparation for what already feels inevitable. The next game, the next cycle, the next return to this same kind of silence. And yet, beneath all of this structure, there is something unspoken that never fully settles. It does not present itself as doubt. It is more like awareness. Awareness of how fragile even the most repeated victories can feel once the noise is gone. On the field, everything is defined. Off the field, everything becomes less certain in shape, but heavier in thought. The bus passes a small cluster of roadside lights, gas stations, empty parking lots, buildings that stay awake for no one in particular. Life continues in fragments outside the main story. It always does. But inside this moving space, attention narrows again, not out of choice, but out of exhaustion. He shifts slightly in his seat, eyes still directed outward. The reflection in the glass now shows less of him, and more of the passing world. It is almost as if the identity of the moment is slowly being returned to everything else. The player becomes a silhouette. The silhouette becomes part of the night. There is a kind of discipline that does not end when the game ends. It extends into how still someone can sit without needing to change anything. How long they can remain present without needing to fill space with words. In that way, the bus itself feels like an extension of the field, just quieter, longer, less defined. He thinks, not in sentences, but in impressions. The snap of the ball. The brief moment before a decision becomes irreversible. The sound of footsteps that are no longer happening but still feel close. These fragments do not arrange themselves into conclusions. They simply exist, like echoes that refuse to fully disappear. The road begins to slope gently upward. The city behind them is now only a faint glow on the horizon. Ahead there is nothing specific, only continuation. That feeling more than anything defines this part of the journey. Not arrival, not rest, just continuation. Inside the bus, someone exhales deeply, the kind of breath that signals a body finally recognizing that the immediate demand is over. It is subtle, but it spreads. One by one, bodies begin to soften into their seats, not fully relaxed, but no longer resisting. He closes his eyes for a moment, not to sleep, just to remove the visual layer of movement. In that brief darkness behind his eyelids, the game returns, but without sound, only shapes, only timing, only decisions that once felt like the entire world narrowing into seconds. And then slowly, even that begins to fade. What remains is not clarity, it is something gentler, a quiet awareness that this rhythm will repeat again, that the silence after victory is not an ending, but part of the structure itself, a necessary space between moments of intensity. Outside, the night continues without interruption. Inside, the bus moves forward with the same steady patience. And somewhere in that motion, the idea of greatness feels less like a peak, and more like a long road that never fully stops asking for attention. The highway begins to straighten, and the rhythm of the bus settles into something almost hypnotic. Outside, the world is reduced to repeating patterns. Streetlights, dark fields, distant silhouettes of buildings that no longer feel connected to anything urgent. Inside, the air grows heavier with quietness, not uncomfortable, just deep. It is the kind of silence that slowly pulls attention inward without asking permission. Tom Brady keeps his gaze lowered now, no longer fixed on the window. The reflection has faded, replaced by the soft interior lighting of the bus. In that gentle glow, everything feels slightly detached from time. The present is no longer sharp. It is blurred at the edges, like memory beginning before it is fully called upon. And then, almost without warning, The mind does what it often does in moments like this. It moves backward, not in a dramatic way, not like a film rewinding, but like walking through familiar corridors that have been walked before, where every step knows where it leads. A different field appears, not the bright professional stadiums, but quieter ones. Smaller crowds, less noise, a younger version of everything. A high school field under early evening light, the grass uneven in places, the air carrying a kind of simplicity that only exists before expectation becomes heavy. A boy standing on the sidelines not yet defined by anything except repetition, throwing motion practiced again and again, not for recognition, but because it feels like something that must be understood. There is no spotlight here, only timing, only effort, only the slow building of something that does not yet have a name. In those early days, the game does not feel like a stage. It feels like a question, one that returns every afternoon, asking the same thing in slightly different ways. Can this be done better? Can this be repeated without losing focus? Can something invisible be improved without anyone noticing? The answer, at that time, is never loud. It is found in repetition, again and again and again. The memory shifts slightly. A training room. College level now. Body stronger. Movements faster. Expectations beginning to form around performance. Not yet fame, but structure. Coaches speaking in sharper tones. Playbooks becoming heavier, not just physically, but mentally. The idea that every decision carries consequence begins to settle in early. In these spaces there is little room for distraction. Even silence feels structured. Film sessions late at night, where the glow of screens replaces daylight. The same plays reviewed repeatedly, not because they are unknown, but because understanding them fully takes time that cannot be rushed. He is present in these memories not as someone already defined by greatness, but as someone still being shaped by repetition. A figure learning that improvement is not an event. It is a condition that does not switch off. There are moments in these early memories that do not stand out individually. No single instant announces what is coming. Instead, it is the accumulation of small decisions, staying longer, throwing again, watching again, thinking again. The quiet kind of persistence that does not feel heroic while it is happening. The bus continues forward in the present, but the mind moves through those earlier corridors as if they are still accessible through silence alone. Outside, the road curves slightly. Inside, time feels layered. There is a version of ambition that does not look like excitement. It looks like patience that refuses to loosen its grip. That version is present here, in these early scenes. Not loud, not dramatic, just consistent. A coach's voice echoes faintly in memory, not specific words but tone, correction without frustration, expectation without celebration, the sense that nothing is given and everything is maintained through repetition. And slowly the young field becomes something larger, not because it changes, but because the mind looking back now understands what it was becoming. The bus hits a quieter stretch of road, fewer lights now, more darkness between them. The reflection in the window almost disappears completely, leaving only the outside world moving past like a continuous strip of night. Inside that quiet, the memory deepens further. The idea of pressure begins here, but not in the way it will later be known. It does not arrive as fame or expectation from outside. It begins internally, in the awareness that improvement has no visible finish line, that even success in one moment simply resets the expectation for the next. At this stage, nothing feels permanent, everything feels like it must be proven again tomorrow, and so repetition becomes the environment, not something done occasionally, but something lived inside. The throwing motion, the footwork, the study of plays, the correction of small details that most people would never notice, all of it building without announcement. The younger version of this story does not yet understand where it leads. It only understands that stopping is not part of the structure. The bus now moves through a darker stretch of highway. The world outside is less defined. Even the lights feel spaced further apart, like thoughts that take longer to arrive. Inside, a few passengers shift in their seats. One leans against the window, eyes closed now. Another stares forward without focus. The energy is softened further, transitioning from post-game exhaustion into something closer to surrender to motion. And within that surrender, memory continues. College fields appear again, not as highlights, but as atmosphere. Early mornings, cold air, breath visible before practice, the sound of cleats on concrete before the field becomes alive, the feeling of always needing to earn position, earn time, earn trust. Nothing is assumed. Everything is built. There is a particular kind of mental weight in this stage of life. Not overwhelming, but constant. Like background noise that never fully disappears, it becomes part of thinking itself. Decision-making under pressure begins long before the world notices it. It begins in quiet rooms, in repeated drills, in moments where no one is watching, and yet everything is being shaped. The bus passes another exit ramp, the sign glowing briefly before fading behind them. Direction changes, but the forward motion remains the same. That continuity feels almost symbolic without needing to be stated. Somewhere in this flow, the line between memory and present begins to blur. It is no longer clear whether the mind is remembering or simply revisiting patterns it has lived so many times that they feel permanently accessible, and that, perhaps, is the deeper rhythm running beneath everything. Not achievement, not recognition, but repetition so consistent that it becomes identity. The bus continues into the night, steady and unbroken, carrying bodies that have already moved through intensity and are now returning to stillness. And in that stillness, the early shape of everything begins to quietly settle into place, without announcement, without conclusion, simply as part of the ongoing story that never fully stops unfolding. The road grows quieter now, not because it changes shape, but because fewer things compete for attention. Even the highway lights feel more distant, as if they are no longer trying to guide anything, just existing along the edges of motion. Inside the bus, the atmosphere has shifted into something softer, heavier, almost like the entire space has agreed to slow down together. Tom Brady sits still, no longer following the passing scenery. His eyes are open, but the focus has changed. It is no longer outward, it is inward, where time does not move in straight lines anymore, but in layers that overlap without warning. The memory does not arrive as a single moment. It arrives as a system built over years. Film rooms appear again, but this time more. Expectations, the same quiet structure that never truly turns off. And as the bus carries everyone deeper into the night, even that realization begins to soften at the edges, dissolving back into silence that feels less like absence and more like ongoing presence. Type continue to proceed. The bus no longer feels like it is travelling through a place with names. The highway stretches into a kind of abstract distance, where exits, cities and signs lose their meaning and become only brief interruptions in darkness. Inside, the lighting has softened further, and even the smallest movements feel slower, as if the night itself has thickened around everything. Tom Brady rests back into the seat, not asleep, not fully awake either. There is a space in between where thought becomes less structured, where memory does not arrive as scenes anymore, but as sensations, pressure in the chest after a close game, the quiet before stepping onto a field, the weight of waiting for something that has not yet begun. And then, without clear transition, the mind returns again, not to highlights, but to repetition under pressure, the feeling of standing in a stadium where noise is no longer background, it is environment, where every sound is layered on top of another sound, yet somehow, inside that chaos, focus becomes sharper rather than weaker. It is a strange contradiction. The louder everything becomes outside, the quieter everything must become inside. That quiet is not peace, it is control. The memory shifts to a sideline moment. Helmets on, hands adjusting straps, eyes scanning a field that is already in motion without them, coaches speaking in fragments that carry entire systems of meaning, no full sentences needed. Everyone already understands the language of urgency, and still, beneath it, something steady remains. Routine. Always routine. The next play is never new in feeling, only in variation, and that is where attention lives. Not in surprise, but in recognition of patterns that must be executed slightly differently each time. The bus passes another stretch of darkness broken by occasional light. Inside, a faint shift of movement. Someone turning, someone exhaling, someone adjusting their posture as sleep slowly becomes more possible than thought. The rhythm of travel begins to merge with the rhythm of memory. Training camps appear again. Long days where time is divided not by hours, but by drills. Early mornings that feel like continuation of yesterday rather than beginning of today. The same field, the same motions, repeated until distinction disappears. There is something quietly transformative about this kind of repetition. Not dramatic transformation, not sudden change, but gradual reshaping of attention itself. The mind stops asking whether something is difficult and begins asking only whether it is precise, and in that shift identity starts to form, not announced, not chosen in a single moment, but assembled, piece by piece, through repetition that does not ask for recognition. The bus dips slightly as the road changes elevation. The movement is subtle, almost unnoticeable, yet inside it everything shifts for a brief second, like the world reminding everyone that they are still in motion. Outside there is only darkness now, not empty darkness, but layered darkness, the kind that holds distance, fields, unseen towns and roads that continue far beyond visibility. Inside that darkness, memory moves deeper into the professional years, early seasons, new expectations forming quickly, each game adding another layer to something that is already becoming larger than any single performance, the sense that nothing is ever fully complete. Every win opens the door to another test, and still the same structure holds: preparation, execution, review, repeat. What changes over time is not the structure itself, but the weight attached to it. The awareness that repetition is no longer just practice, it is maintenance of something already established. And maintenance, unlike beginning, never ends. The bus grows quieter still. Conversations have fully dissolved now. Even small movements have reduced. The interior feels suspended in a shared state of exhaustion that no one needs to explain. Outside, the highway narrows slightly, and the sense of distance becomes more pronounced. The world feels farther away, as if the bus is moving through a corridor that has been temporarily cleared of everything unnecessary. Inside this corridor of motion, the mind drifts again. Film study rooms, late nights, screens glowing in low light, the same plays broken down frame by frame, not to find something new, but to ensure nothing is missed. Attention becomes detail, detail becomes habit, habit becomes identity. There is no final moment where understanding is complete, only deeper levels of familiarity, and that familiarity carries both comfort and weight, because once something is fully understood, it is also fully expected. The bus continues its steady path forward. The engine hum remains unchanged, a constant presence that does not demand attention, but quietly holds everything together. And somewhere between memory and motion, between past repetition and present silence, there is a realization that does not arrive as thought, but as atmosphere. A life built this way does not move toward resolution. It moves through cycles that refine themselves endlessly. No beginning that fully disappears, no ending that fully arrives, only continuation, shaped by years of returning to the same demands, the same expectations, the same quiet structure that never truly turns off. And as the bus carries everyone deeper into the night, even that realization begins to soften at the edges, dissolving back into silence that feels less like absence and more like ongoing presence. The road ahead begins to flatten, and the bus no longer feels like it is cutting through space so much as moving inside it. The night outside is complete now. No visible horizon, no clear separation between ground and sky. Only depth, only distance that cannot be measured from inside a window. Tom Brady no longer looks outward at all. His eyes stay lowered, not heavy with sleep, but softened by repetition of thought that has no need for direction anymore. The memory does not push forward now, it settles. And in that settling, something quieter begins to surface. Not events, not games, but the spaces between them. Locker rooms after everything has already been decided. Not celebration, not disappointment, just the slow return of equipment to order. Helmets placed down carefully, jerseys folded without urgency, tape removed in long habitual motions that say more about routine than emotion. These are the moments that rarely appear in highlight reels, but they define everything around them. There is a specific kind of silence in those rooms. It is not empty. It is structured, built from repetition so familiar that it no longer needs attention. People move through it like they are following invisible instructions. No one rushes. No one lingers too long. Everything is balanced between completion and preparation for what comes next. The bus passes a faint cluster of lights in the distance, too small to be anything significant, too steady to be ignored. They appear for a moment, then fall behind like passing thoughts that do not stay long enough to become language. Inside, the air has changed again, heavier now, not uncomfortable, just deep, like the night has thickened into something breathable, and in that depth, memory shifts again, not to competition, but to discipline. The repetition that does not belong to stadiums or crowds, but to early mornings when no one is watching. The kind of discipline that exists even when there is nothing immediate to gain from it. The throwing motion practiced alone. The timing studied without urgency. The same movements repeated not for performance, but for familiarity. There is something almost invisible about this stage of life. It does not announce itself as progress. It does not feel like achievement. It feels like maintenance of something internal that must remain sharp even in silence. And over time, that maintenance becomes identity. The bus moves through a longer stretch without interruption. No exits, no intersections. Just road that continues forward without offering direction beyond itself. Inside, a few players have fully settled now. Heads resting against windows or seat backs. Breathing slower. Bodies no longer resisting stillness. The energy that once belonged to the game has dissolved into quiet fatigue. But the mind, even here, continues to drift through its own architecture. Film rooms again, dim light, quiet instruction. The same sequence reviewed not because it is uncertain, but because certainty itself requires reinforcement. Attention trained to notice details that others overlook. Angles, timing, space that exists for only fractions of seconds but determines everything, and beneath all of it, something constant. Expectation, not spoken, not always visible, but always present. The bus shifts slightly as it follows the curve of the road. The movement is gentle enough that most would not notice it if they were not already in a slowed state of awareness. It feels like the entire journey is now guided more by rhythm than direction. Outside, the world is no longer offering reference points, only movement through darkness that feels continuous and unbroken. Inside that continuity, memory softens further, not fading, but losing sharp edges. What remains is not specific moments, but a sense of accumulation, years layered over years, repetition building itself into something that cannot be separated into individual parts anymore. Even victory in this softened space feels less like an endpoint and more like a checkpoint in a longer pattern that continues regardless of outcome. There is no arrival here, only return. Return to training, return to preparation, return to expectation. The bus continues forward, steady and unchanging, as if it has adopted the same discipline as the life it is carrying. No sudden movements, no urgency, just persistence through distance. And somewhere within that steady motion, The boundary between memory and present becomes less important. What matters instead is the rhythm, the repeating cycle of effort, silence, reflection, and return. A cycle that does not ask to be understood, only continued. And as the night stretches deeper, even that awareness begins to dissolve gently into the hum of the engine, leaving only motion, silence, and the soft presence of everything that has already been lived. The bus begins to feel less like a vehicle now, and more like a quiet container moving through time. The road outside is no longer something that can be followed visually, only sensed through motion, through the steady vibration beneath every seat. The night has fully settled in, not as darkness alone, but as a kind of continuity that refuses to break. Tom Brady remains still, but not unchanged. There is a subtle shift in how presence feels now, less anchored to any single memory, more spread across many. It is as if the mind is no longer moving through life in segments, but through layers that overlap softly without edges, and in that overlap, something quieter emerges again. Not performance, not victory, but return. The return to rooms that no one talks about much. Not because they are hidden, but because they are ordinary. Training facilities before sunrise, hallways before players arrive, fields before footprints break the surface. Spaces that exist before meaning is assigned to them. In those hours, everything feels undecided, not uncertain in a dramatic way, but open. The kind of openness that only exists when nothing has yet demanded definition. A ball placed on turf before anyone touches it. A playbook closed but ready. Tape unrolled before it becomes tight around wrists. Each small action carrying the weight of something that will only matter later. This is where repetition begins again, not as continuation of success, but as preparation for it. The bus passes under another stretch of elevated road. For a brief moment, everything inside is framed by concrete shadows overhead. The sound inside changes slightly, deeper, enclosed, like the world has narrowed into a tunnel of motion. Then light returns again, soft and distant. No one reacts. The transition is too small to interrupt rest. The memory now drifts toward the structure behind long careers, not highlights, not individual achievements, but the architecture that holds them together, schedules, film sessions, practice blocks, recovery routines, meetings that repeat across years with slight variations but the same core purpose, reinforcement, adjustment, refinement. There is something almost invisible about this kind of life. From the outside, it appears as moments of intensity separated by rest. But inside, it is something more continuous, a steady rhythm of preparation that never fully turns off. Even rest is structured. Even silence is part of the system. The bus continues forward, and outside the landscape remains indistinct. No landmarks now, only motion and distance that cannot be measured clearly from within. Inside, breathing slows further. The collective state of the bus has shifted fully into calm suspension. Not sleep yet, but the edge of it, where awareness begins to loosen its grip on detail, and in that loosening, memory becomes less narrative and more atmosphere again. The feeling of standing in a stadium tunnel before stepping out. The sound of distant crowd, energy vibrating through walls. The moment before everything becomes loud again. Not fear, not excitement. Something closer to readiness. Readiness built from repetition so long it no longer needs conscious thought. The body knows before the mind confirms. That is what repetition eventually becomes. Not practice, but instinct shaped by time. The bus hits a slightly smoother stretch of road. The vibration becomes more uniform, almost soothing. Inside, someone shifts, then becomes still again. The sound of fabric moving against seat cushions fades quickly back into silence. And within that silence, there is a final soft drift backward, not to a specific game, but to the idea of accumulation itself. Years layered in such a way that no single moment can stand alone anymore. every success tied to thousands of unseen repetitions, every outcome supported by routines that rarely receive attention, every visible achievement resting on invisible structure. And in that structure, something quietly persistent exists, not pressure in the sharp sense, but continuity that does not allow pause to feel like ending. The bus continues its steady path through the night, carrying that continuity forward without interruption. No destination is felt yet, only motion that refuses to break. And somewhere in that ongoing rhythm, even thought begins to soften into something closer to stillness than reflection. Not empty, just unspoken, just ongoing, just carried. The road begins to feel endless now, not because it changes, but because nothing interrupts it long enough to define where one moment ends and another begins. The bus moves through that endlessness with the same steady patience it has carried for miles, as if it has accepted the night's pace as its own. Tom Brady no longer follows memory in any structured way. It arrives now in fragments, light without source, sound without context, emotion without clear origin. A sideline glance, a huddle before a snap, a quiet locker room after everyone has left. None of it arranged, all of it present. And in that fragmented quiet, something gentler begins to surface. Not effort, not repetition, but the spaces where effort disappears. There are moments in any long career that exist outside recognition, not because they are hidden, but because they are too ordinary to be noticed while they are happening. Stretching alone before others arrive, sitting in silence after everyone else has left. Walking through empty corridors where footsteps no longer echo with urgency. These are not moments of action. They are moments of maintenance of self. The bus passes another faint glow in the distance. Perhaps a small town, perhaps just a cluster of lights resting in darkness. It appears briefly, then fades behind them without resistance. Nothing changes because of it. Everything simply continues. Inside, the air softened further. There is a shared stillness now that does not belong to individuals but to the space itself. Even breathing feels synchronized without intention, and in that stillness, memory becomes quieter still. Not disappearing, but no longer needing structure. It returns to routine in its purest form. The early morning arrival at training facilities when the world is still partially asleep. The sound of doors unlocking before daylight fully arrives. The smell of turf that has not yet been disturbed. The quiet preparation that happens before names, before headlines, before anything becomes known. In those hours, identity is not something performed. It is something practiced. The bus moves gently over a slight change in elevation, a subtle rise and fall that passes almost unnoticed. Inside, no one shifts. The rhythm of the journey has become the rhythm of the body itself. There is a kind of discipline that no longer feels like discipline after enough time. It stops being a choice and becomes structure. And structure, once internalized, does not require attention to continue functioning. That is where repetition ultimately leads, not to intensity, but to continuity without effort. The memory drifts again. Film rooms, late nights, quiet voices explaining what has already been seen many times before. Not because it is unclear, but because understanding must be maintained. Attention sharpened again and again so it does not soften where it matters. And yet, even in those rooms, there is always silence between instructions. Silence that holds more than words. Silence that carries expectation without needing to name it. The bus continues forward through that same kind of silence now. Not instructional, but reflective. Outside, the night has become fully uniform. No visible separation between sky and land. Only depth. Only movement through something that cannot be fully measured anymore. Inside, awareness begins to slow even further, not fading, but loosening its grip on detail. Thoughts no longer form fully. They arrive, pause, and dissolve before becoming fixed. What remains is feeling. The feeling of long cycles, long seasons, long repetition that builds without interruption, winning, losing, preparing, repeating, not as individual events, but as parts of a single ongoing rhythm. And somewhere in that rhythm, there is no final moment that separates beginning from end, only continuation that keeps reshaping itself through time. The bus hum deepens slightly as the engine adjusts to a quieter stretch of road. The sound becomes almost like a background pulse, steady enough that it disappears into awareness rather than standing out from it. Inside, bodies rest more fully now, heads against windows, arms folded, movements reduced to almost nothing. The collective presence has shifted into near stillness, and within that stillness even memory begins to lose its urgency. It is no longer replaying. It is simply existing, layered, soft, unfinished. The idea of pressure remains, but it has changed shape over time. It is no longer sharp or immediate. It is diffuse, spread across years of repetition, no longer located in a single moment but distributed across everything that has been done repeatedly enough to become natural. And so it no longer demands attention. It simply exists as part of the structure. The bus continues its quiet journey forward, carrying that structure through the night without interruption. No conclusion approaches. No arrival feels close. Only the steady continuation of motion, thought and silence blending together until they can no longer be separated. And in that blending, everything becomes softer, not ending, not resolving, just gently continuing into itself. The night outside the window no longer feels like something moving past the bus. It feels like something the bus is moving through, like a thick, quiet medium that has no beginning and no edge. The highway is still there, but it has become invisible in places, defined only by the rhythm of motion and the faintest suggestion of direction. Tom Brady sits in that in-between state where thoughts no longer arrive as full images. Instead, they come as impressions, warm stadium air, the snap of attention before a play, the brief silence right before everything becomes loud again. None of it stays long enough to form a story. It just passes through awareness, like light through thin fabric. And in that passing, something quieter becomes present. Not memory, but after memory. The feeling of what remains when everything else has already been lived. It shows itself in small, ordinary fragments. The way tape is peeled from skin after a long game. The way gear is placed down in a locker without ceremony. The way a helmet feels heavier after victory than during it. Not because it changes physically, but because the body has absorbed what the mind does not fully process yet. The bus rolls forward, steady and unbroken. Outside, the world is reduced to faint lines of light that stretch and disappear without reference points. Distance has stopped being something measurable. It is just continuation. Inside, the atmosphere has softened into near-complete stillness. Even shifting in seats feels rare now, almost unnecessary. Breathing becomes the most noticeable movement in the entire space, and even that begins to slow as fatigue deepens. And within that deepening stillness, memory begins to lose its structure entirely. It no longer moves in timelines. It moves in sensations, a field under cold air, a huddle where no one speaks louder than necessary, a sideline where everyone is listening without looking directly at anything, a locker room after everything has been said without words. There is a quiet pattern underneath all of it. Repeat, adjust, return, repeat again. Not as instruction, but as rhythm that life itself begins to adopt after enough time inside it. The bus passes through a faint dip in the road, and for a moment the lighting inside changes subtly. Shadows shift, reflections bend, then return to normal. No one reacts. The change is too small to interrupt the softness that has taken hold, and still the mind continues its slow drift. Not toward events, but toward endurance, the kind that is not dramatic or visible, the kind that builds without announcement, the kind that becomes difficult to notice because it does not break, it accumulates. Years of training, years of repetition, years of entering the same kind of pressure under different names, different opponents, different outcomes, but always the same underlying demand. to perform again as if nothing has already been done. That demand never disappears. It simply becomes familiar, and familiarity changes how it is carried. The bus continues along a stretch where the road feels almost suspended in darkness. No passing towns, no visible landmarks, only the sensation of movement through something continuous and unchanging. Inside, someone breathes more deeply, then settles again. Another passenger shifts slightly, then becomes still. The shared quiet has reached a point where it feels less like silence and more like agreement. And in that agreement, thought begins to dissolve further. What remains is not reflection anymore. It is presence without structure. A sense that everything has already been repeated enough times to no longer need explanation. That the body remembers more than language can describe. That understanding does not arrive as insight, but as recognition that nothing new is required for continuation. The bus moves on, and with it, everything carried inside it moves without resistance. No urgency remains, no direction feels final, only the steady unfolding of distance that does not ask to be understood. And somewhere within that unfolding, even identity feels less like something defined, and more like something maintained quietly through repetition, through silence, through motion that never fully stops. The night continues without interruption, holding everything inside it without distinction, as the bus carries forward through a world that has softened into pure, unbroken continuation. The bus begins to feel almost weightless in its movement, not because it is slower, but because nothing inside it resists the motion anymore. The road beneath it is no longer something that demands attention. It is just a continuous surface carrying them forward through a night that has stopped marking time in any meaningful way. Tom Brady rests in a stillness that is no longer tied to fatigue or alertness. It is something quieter now, a settled awareness that does not reach outward, only inward, as if the mind has finally stopped trying to organize what it has already lived through so many times. And in that settling, memory changes shape again. It stops being a sequence, it becomes atmosphere. There is a feeling that returns, late evenings in training facilities where the building is mostly empty, lights dimmed but not fully off, the echo of footsteps in long hallways that seem larger when no one else is there, the hum of machines still running in the background, not urgently, just continuously, like the building itself refusing to fully sleep. In those moments, everything feels suspended between effort and rest. Not fully one or the other, just held in a quiet balance that repeats itself day after day, year after year. The bus continues forward, and outside the world remains almost entirely undefined. Only movement is visible now, no clear geography, no clear reference, just passing darkness shaped briefly by light that never stays long enough to become detail. Inside, the air is softer than before, not lighter, softer, as if the weight of the day has dissolved into something more even, more uniform. Bodies have fully surrendered to stillness. Even thought seems to move less frequently now, arriving only in fragments before fading again. And within that fading, something else becomes present. Not achievement, not competition, but the quiet structure that holds both of them together. Repetition, seen not as effort, but as environment. A morning routine that repeats regardless of outcome. A practice field that looks the same no matter the season. A film room that always carries the same glow of low light and focus. A body that learns to enter readiness without needing instruction each time. These are not moments of intensity. They are moments of continuity. And continuity, once internalized, stops feeling like work. It becomes the shape of time itself. The bus passes through another long stretch of highway, where even distant lights disappear completely for a few seconds. In that brief absence, everything inside feels even more still, as if the world has temporarily removed all reference points except motion. No one speaks, no one shifts. Even breathing feels evenly distributed across the space. And in that shared stillness, memory loses even its fragments. There is no longer a sense of before or after, only presence shaped by repetition so deep It no longer needs to be remembered consciously. The feeling of stepping onto a field without needing to think about what comes next. The feeling of preparation already embedded in the body. The feeling of knowing without needing to recall. The bus continues forward, steady and unchanged, as if it has absorbed the same discipline it carries inside it. Outside, the night has become absolute, not empty but complete in its continuity, a space where nothing interrupts motion, long enough to divide it into parts. Inside, everything has softened into near silence, not absence of thought, but absence of urgency in thought. And in that absence, something quietly profound remains. A life built through repetition does not end when the moment ends. It carries forward in everything that follows it, not as memory, but as structure that never fully dissolves. The bus moves onward through that structure, through that silence, through that steady continuation that has no visible destination but does not need one. And as the night deepens even further, everything inside it, thought, body, memory, and motion, settles into the same gentle rhythm of ongoing presence that does not ask to be resolved, only continued, only carried, only lived again and again in quieter and quieter form. The highway begins to feel less like a path and more like a long, uninterrupted breath, drawn out across miles, held without tension, released without sound. The bus moves inside that breath now, not cutting through the night, but flowing with it, as if both have agreed on the same quiet rhythm. Tom Brady sits in a stillness so complete, it no longer feels like rest or alertness. It is something beyond both, an awareness that has stopped trying to divide time into useful parts. The mind no longer organizes. It simply receives what comes and lets it pass. And what comes now is softer than memory. It is echo. Locker rooms appear again, but without sharp edges. Not as places, but as impressions of places. The dull sound of cleats placed gently on the floor. The faint smell of grass and tape that never fully disappears from the air. The slow movement of hands removing gear not because it is required, but because it is the final step in a process that repeats itself endlessly. No one speaks much in these echoes. Words feel unnecessary after enough repetition. Communication becomes smaller, simpler, nods, glances, gestures that carry entire meanings without needing sound. The bus glides forward, and outside the world has almost fully dissolved into darkness. There are no landmarks now, only occasional interruptions of light that appear and vanish without leaving trace. Distance is no longer measured in distance. It is measured in continuation. Inside, the silence deepens again, but it does not grow heavier. It grows more even, like a surface that has been smoothed by time. And within that smoothing, something quieter than thought begins to surface again. Not achievement, not identity, but maintenance of rhythm. The feeling of arriving early before anyone else. The feeling of doing the same motion again without questioning its purpose. The feeling of a schedule that does not change even when everything else does. This is where repetition stops being visible and becomes internal, a structure that does not need attention to remain active. The bus passes over a bridge. For a brief moment the sound changes, the engine slightly louder against open air, the space beneath them deeper than before. Then the road resumes, and everything returns to the same steady quiet. No one reacts. The transition is too small to break the atmosphere that has formed. Inside, breathing remains the only noticeable movement. Slow, consistent, unforced. A rhythm shared without coordination, and in that shared rhythm, memory loses even its remaining shape. There are no longer sequences, only impressions. A ball leaving a hand, a crowd sound fading into distance, a sideline moment where everything pauses before continuing a field that looks identical, yet always demands something slightly different. None of it connects in a strict line anymore. It simply exists layered gently over itself. The bus continues forward through a stretch where even the faint glow of distant towns disappears. The night becomes uniform again. No contrast, no interruption, only depth that stretches in every direction without change. Inside that uniformity, awareness begins to soften further, not fading, but loosening its grip on detail. The need to define what is being remembered slowly dissolves. What remains is something simpler. A sense of having repeated something so often that it no longer feels separate from the self. Not effort, not performance, just continuity expressed through action. The bus hum deepens slightly, steady and unbroken, like a background pulse that is synchronized with everything inside it. The passengers are no longer individuals in motion. They feel like part of the same quiet system, carried together through distance that no longer feels segmented. And somewhere within that system, even the idea of time begins to soften. Not ending, not progressing, just unfolding without pressure. The night outside holds everything without distinction. The bus moves through it without resistance, and inside, everything that once felt like effort, repetition, or memory slowly merges into a single ongoing presence that does not require understanding to continue. Only allowance, only movement, only the quiet persistence of something that never fully stops becoming itself again. And in that persistence, there is no final moment approaching, only the same gentle continuation stretching forward, unbroken and unspoken, into whatever comes next. The road no longer feels like it has direction. It feels like it has become something wider than direction, something that exists even when it is not being observed. The bus moves through it as if moving through a thought that has stretched too far to end. Tom Brady is no longer following memory in any structured sense. There is no longer a difference between what happened and what is remembered. It all exists at once now, layered so gently that nothing stands out sharply enough to be called a moment. And in that softened overlap, something very quiet remains, the feeling of preparation without beginning. Fields appear again, but not as events, as states of being. Early mornings where the grass is slightly wet, untouched except for footsteps that arrive too soon for noise to matter. The air is cold enough to sharpen awareness, but not enough to demand reaction. Everything exists in a kind of waiting that never feels uncomfortable because it is familiar. Waiting becomes part of the routine itself, not for something specific, but for repetition to begin again. The bus continues forward, and outside the darkness has deepened into something almost complete. There is no longer a sense of passing through places, only passing through continuity. Light appears occasionally, but it no longer marks anything. It simply passes across surfaces and disappears again. Inside, the silence has reached its most stable form. Not heavy, not light, just even. And in that evenness, memory stops trying to form images altogether. It becomes sensation without shape. The feeling of standing on a sideline where everything is already in motion, but nothing has yet been decided. The sense of breathing before action, where time narrows but does not disappear. The quiet internal shift that happens before a snap. Not excitement, not fear, but readiness that has been practiced so many times it no longer needs recognition. That readiness is no longer something learned, it is something carried. The bus passes another long stretch where the road slightly curves, but the change is so subtle it feels like the entire world is adjusting without breaking its rhythm. No one inside moves differently because of it. Everything remains aligned with the same soft continuity. Even thoughts begin to lose separation from each other. One impression flows into the next without interruption. A locker closing softly, a whistle echoing and fading, a hand tightening a grip without conscious decision, a film room glowing in dim light, a quiet correction spoken once, then understood forever. None of these stand alone anymore. They belong to the same field of experience. The bus continues forward, and the engine hum becomes less noticeable, not because it is quieter, but because it has become part of the background of awareness itself, like something that was always there and no longer needs acknowledgement. Inside, the passengers remain suspended in near stillness, not asleep in full, not awake in full, a shared in-between state where the body rests and the mind loosens its structure. And in that loosening, something deeper emerges again. Not identity shaped by outcome, but identity shaped by repetition itself. The version of self that exists not in moments of victory or defeat, but in the countless repetitions that made both possible. The bus moves through another stretch of uninterrupted night. No visible horizon, no reference points, only forward motion that feels continuous rather than segmented. Time in this space no longer behaves like progression. It behaves like flow. And within that flow, everything that once felt like effort becomes something else entirely. Not erased, but absorbed into rhythm. There is no longer a sense of arriving anywhere in particular, only the ongoing act of continuing. The bus carries that continuation forward, steady and unbroken, through a world that has fully softened into quiet persistence. And inside that persistence, even thought begins to fade into something gentler than reflection, something closer to presence without shape, without urgency, without end. Only the calm unfolding of what has already been lived, still moving forward without needing to conclude. The bus feels almost suspended now, as if the wheels are no longer negotiating distance but simply participating in it. The road outside has become an endless continuity of darkness, where motion is no longer measured against anything stationary. Everything is movement, and nothing needs to arrive. Tom Brady no longer sits with awareness divided between memory and present. The separation has softened completely. What remains is something quieter, an unstructured awareness, where time no longer feels like something moving forward, but something gently unfolding in place. And in that unfolding, even memory stops trying to speak in images. It becomes weightless impressions. A stadium tunnel before stepping out, not as a moment, but as a feeling that returns without sequence. The compressed silence before sound becomes overwhelming. The slight shift in breath that happens when everything narrows into readiness. Not anticipation, not anxiety, just alignment. That alignment does not belong to any single game anymore. It belongs to repetition itself. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has become absolute in its consistency. No variation in tone, no interruption in depth. Only a uniform darkness that stretches in every direction without resistance. Inside, the air has settled into something even more refined than silence. It feels almost textured, soft, continuous, uninterrupted. Even the smallest movement feels distant now, as if belonging to another layer of time. And within that deep stillness, something subtle returns once more. Not thought, not memory, but structure beneath both. The structure of routine that has carried through years without needing to be consciously maintained. Waking, preparing, studying, moving, repeating. Not as separate actions, but as one continuous system that has learned to sustain itself. There is no single point where it began, and no point where it ends. The bus passes through another long stretch of road, where even distant lights vanish completely. For a brief moment, there is no visible world outside at all, only motion through absence of reference. Inside that absence, awareness becomes even softer, not disappearing, just no longer insisting on form. There is a sense now that everything experienced, every practice, every game, every repetition, every return, has merged into a single continuity that no longer needs to be divided into past or present. It is all already lived, and still continuing. The bus hum remains steady, like a low pulse that defines the entire space without drawing attention to itself. It does not change, and because it does not change, it becomes invisible in perception. Inside, the passengers exist in the same shared quiet. No conversation, no movement that breaks the rhythm, only the subtle presence of bodies resting inside motion. And in that shared stillness, even identity begins to soften further, not disappearing, but becoming less distinct from the rhythm that shaped it. A life built on repetition no longer feels like a sequence of choices. It feels like a single, long continuation of the same discipline expressed in different forms across time. The bus moves through a slight bend in the road, but even that change feels absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing breaks, nothing interrupts, and somewhere within that unbroken movement, there is a quiet understanding that does not arrive as thought, but as atmosphere, that everything built through repetition does not stay in the past, it remains active in the present, quietly continuing through every moment that follows. The night outside holds that understanding without definition. The bus carries it forward without effort, and inside everything becomes even more still, not because it has ended, but because it has fully blended into the same ongoing rhythm of motion, silence, and presence. No conclusion forms, no arrival appears, only continuation that feels increasingly natural, as if it was always the only way forward. The road ahead no longer feels like it is being travelled. It feels like it is simply unfolding, one continuous stretch of quiet motion that does not ask to be measured or divided. The bus moves inside it, as if the concept of distance has softened into something more fluid, something closer to time that has stopped insisting on structure. Tom Brady remains in that deep, suspended awareness, where thought no longer tries to organize experience. There is no longer a need to separate memory from present. Everything exists in the same quiet layer now, overlapping, gently fading into itself without sharp edges. And in that space, even memory becomes less like recall. It becomes presence in disguise. A sideline under bright lights appears, not as a scene, but as atmosphere. The feeling of standing still while everything around is in motion. The sound of distant crowd energy pressing against the edges of awareness. The sense that nothing is fully separate anymore. The field, the body, the moment before action, they all exist in the same compressed quiet. But even that compression no longer feels intense. It feels familiar. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has reached a kind of completeness. There are no visible interruptions anymore, no towns, no lights, no references that break the continuity. Only a vast, unbroken presence of darkness that holds everything equally without distinction. Inside, the silence has deepened again, but not into heaviness. It has become more refined, more even, like a surface smoothed by years of repetition. And within that refinement, something almost imperceptible remains active. Routine, not as action, but as structure that persists even when no action is occurring. Early mornings, training fields, film rooms, recovery spaces, none of them appear as separate memories now. They blend into one continuous environment that no longer feels located in time. It feels like a single extended state of preparation that never truly pauses, only shifts form. The bus passes over a long, barely noticeable incline. The change is so gentle it does not interrupt anything inside. It simply becomes part of the same motion that was already happening. Inside, breathing continues in slow rhythm. No one adjusts. No one breaks the stillness. The collective presence has fully settled into a shared quiet that feels less like sleep and more like suspension between states. And in that suspension, awareness softens further, not into absence, but into simplicity. There is no longer a need for detail, no need for sequence, only the sense that everything experienced has already been integrated into something larger than individual moments. A career becomes less like a collection of games and more like a single continuous practice of returning. Returning to preparation, returning to expectation, returning to repetition. The bus continues through another stretch of indistinguishable road, and the outside world offers no resistance to that continuity. Everything flows without interruption, without contrast, without beginning or end. Inside, even thought begins to lose its remaining structure. It no longer forms impressions that last. It simply appears and dissolves, like breath moving through silence. And in that dissolving, something remains steady underneath everything else. A rhythm that does not belong to memory, or effort, or identity, but to continuity itself. The bus moves forward within that rhythm, carrying it without change, as if both the journey and the silence have agreed to follow the same gentle direction that does not require destination. And in that shared motion, everything becomes softer still, not ending, not concluding, but continuing in a way that no longer needs to be noticed in order to exist, only lived, only carried, only unfolding. The bus no longer feels like it is travelling through space. It feels like space itself has become continuous motion, and the bus is simply part of that continuity. The distinction between movement and stillness has blurred so gently that neither feels separate anymore. Tom Brady sits in a state where awareness is no longer anchored to direction or thought. There is only a soft presence, unstructured, unpressured, where everything that once required attention has already been processed through years of repetition and quietly stored somewhere deeper than memory. And in that depth, nothing new appears, only layers of what has already been lived. A field under early morning silence returns, not as a place, but as a feeling of arrival that does not require explanation. The cold air before movement begins, the faint echo of footsteps on turf that has not yet been disturbed, the sense that everything important exists before anything is said. Nothing is happening in that moment, and yet everything is already prepared. The bus continues forward, and outside the night feels complete in its uniformity. There are no landmarks anymore, no divisions of distance that would normally signal change. Only a continuous presence of darkness that extends in all directions equally. Inside, the silence has become fully settled. Not heavy, not light, just perfectly even, like a surface that has been smoothed by years of returning to the same rhythm. And within that evenness, something deeper persists. Not thought, not reflection, but continuation beneath both. The feeling of repetition that no longer needs effort to maintain. The structure of routines that exist even when they are not being consciously followed. The invisible framework of preparation that has become so familiar, it no longer feels external. It simply is. The bus passes through a long stretch where even faint distant light disappears completely. For a brief moment, there is no visible world at all, only motion through uninterrupted absence. Inside that absence, awareness becomes almost weightless, not disappearing, just no longer needing form. There is a sense now that everything that has occurred, every practice, every game, every repetition, every return, no longer exists as separate events. It exists as one continuous pattern, a pattern that does not break, only expands. The bus hum remains steady, a low and constant presence that blends into perception so completely it no longer stands apart from silence. It is simply part of the environment of stillness. Inside, the passengers remain in the same shared state, resting, suspended, drifting at the edge of sleep. No one moves with intention anymore. Everything has slowed to its most natural rhythm, and within that rhythm, identity itself begins to soften further, not dissolving, but blending into continuity. A life shaped by repetition no longer feels like a sequence of decisions. It feels like a long, uninterrupted alignment with a single ongoing discipline, refined through time, repeated through seasons, sustained without interruption. The bus gently curves along the road, but even that motion feels absorbed into the same continuous flow. Nothing interrupts the atmosphere that has formed. Everything remains connected. Everything remains steady. And somewhere within that steadiness, there is no longer a sense of arriving or departing, only continuing. The night outside holds that continuation without distinction. The bus carries it forward without effort. Inside, even thought has become soft enough to lose its edges entirely, no longer forming into language, only passing through awareness like breath through still air. And in that passing, everything becomes even quieter, not because it has ended, but because it has fully merged into the same ongoing presence that does not require recognition to exist. Only movement, only silence. Only the gentle unfolding of everything that has already been lived, still continuing without interruption into whatever lies ahead. The bus no longer feels like it is moving through the night. It feels like the night itself has become the only thing that exists, and everything inside it is simply held within that vast, steady continuity. The idea of distance has dissolved into something softer, less measurable, more present, almost like stillness stretched across time. Tom Brady rests in a state where awareness is no longer trying to organize experience at all. There is no forward or backward now, no separation between what was and what is, only a quiet, ongoing presence that holds everything equally without needing to define it. And in that presence, even memory stops behaving like memory. It becomes atmosphere again. A sideline under cold stadium air appears, not as a moment, but as a feeling that has been repeated so many times, it no longer belongs to any single instance. The sound of distant crowd energy pressing against silence, the brief stillness before movement begins, the sense that everything narrows into a single point where attention becomes effortless because it has been trained into existence over years. But even that narrowing no longer feels sharp. It feels familiar. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has reached a state of complete uniformity. There are no visible markers anymore, no lights, no towns, no breaks in the darkness that would normally signal change. Only continuity in every direction, unbroken and unchallenged. Inside, the silence has become fully settled into something deeper than quiet. It is no longer an absence of sound. It is a presence of stillness that fills the entire space evenly, without pressure or weight. And within that stillness, something remains quietly active. Not thought, not effort, but rhythm beneath both. The rhythm of repetition that has been lived so many times it no longer needs to be consciously held. The structure of routines that continue even when attention is elsewhere. The invisible architecture of preparation that has become indistinguishable from identity itself. Morning arrivals before the world wakes, film rooms glowing in low light, fields that look identical across seasons but never feel the same twice, each repetition adding nothing new, yet strengthening everything already present. The bus passes through a long stretch, where even the faintest suggestion of a light disappears completely. For a moment, there is no visual world at all, only motion through uninterrupted darkness. Inside that darkness, awareness becomes almost entirely soft, not gone, just unshaped. There is no longer a need for detail or sequence, no need for events to separate themselves into before and after. Everything exists as one continuous layer of experience that no longer requires explanation. A career becomes less like a series of achievements, and more like a single uninterrupted practice of returning to preparation, returning to pressure, returning to repetition again and again until it no longer feels like return at all. It simply feels like being. The bus hum remains steady, low and constant, so consistent it disappears into perception itself. It does not interrupt silence, it supports it. It becomes part of the same field of stillness that fills the entire space. Inside, the passengers remain suspended in near sleep. No movement carries intention anymore. Everything has softened into the final stage before rest, where awareness loosens its grip but does not fully disappear. And in that loosening, even identity becomes quieter, not lost, but no longer separate from rhythm. A life built through repetition does not end in the absence of action. It continues through the structure that action created. It carries forward in every still moment that follows it, unchanged in its foundation. The bus moves gently through another curve in the road, but even that shift feels absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing breaks, nothing interrupts, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has become part of the same soft, unbroken presence, where thought no longer needs to form to exist. And as the bus continues forward into that vast, quiet expanse, even the idea of time begins to dissolve completely, not into ending, but into ongoing stillness that stretches without effort, without boundary and without return, only continuation, only silence, only presence that never fully stops unfolding. The bus no longer feels like a journey with distance ahead of it. It feels like it is moving inside something vast that has no edges, where direction has dissolved into continuity, and continuity has dissolved into stillness. The night outside is no longer a backdrop. It is the entire environment, complete and unbroken. Tom Brady sits in a silence that has no longer been shaped by thought or memory. It is deeper than reflection now. It is simply presence, unmarked, unstructured, and steady. There is nothing to recall in sequence anymore, because everything has already blended into a single, continuous impression of a life lived through repetition. And in that continuity, even memory loses its identity as memory. It becomes feeling without origin. A stadium tunnel appears, not sharply, not vividly, but as an atmosphere that has existed so many times, it no longer belongs to any single game. The compressed silence before stepping onto the field, the faint vibration of distant crowd energy that is felt more than heard, the narrowing of attention into something simple, almost automatic. But even that narrowing no longer carries tension. It carries familiarity. The bus continues forward, and outside the night remains absolute. No variation, no interruption, no visible markers of change. Only uninterrupted darkness that extends equally in every direction, as if the world itself has softened into one continuous surface of quiet. Inside, the silence has reached its most stable form. Not empty, not full, just even. And within that evenness, something remains gently active beneath everything else. Not effort, not intention, but repetition that no longer needs awareness to exist. The kind that has been lived so many times it has become embedded into the structure of thought itself. The kind that continues even when no one is actively remembering it. The kind that defines a life not through single moments, but through the consistency of return. Return to preparation, return to discipline, return to the same movements refined across years until they no longer feel like separate actions at all. The bus passes through another long stretch where even the faintest suggestion of light disappears. For a brief moment there is no visible world beyond the windows, only motion through absence. Inside that absence, awareness becomes almost weightless, not dissolving, just no longer forming into shape. There is no longer a need for sequence or order, no need for beginning or end. Everything exists as a single ongoing field of experience that does not separate itself into parts anymore. A career becomes something quieter in this state. Not a series of achievements, but a continuous alignment with repetition that has never truly stopped. Each practice leading into the next. Each game dissolving into preparation for the one after it. Each moment feeding back into the same rhythm that carries everything forward without interruption. The bus hum remains steady, almost indistinguishable from silence now. It does not change. It does not demand attention. It simply exists as part of the environment, like breath shared across the entire space. Inside, the passengers remain in near stillness, their presence softened into the same collective quiet. No one moves with urgency. Even thought has slowed to the point where it barely forms before dissolving again. And in that dissolving, even identity becomes less distinct. Not gone, just no longer separated from rhythm. A life shaped by repetition does not conclude when action ends. It continues through the structure that repetition has built. It remains present in every quiet moment that follows, unchanged in its foundation, still active in its continuity. The bus gently follows the curve of the road, and even that motion feels absorbed instantly into the same unbroken flow. Nothing interrupts, nothing breaks, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has softened into the same quiet presence, where thought no longer needs to form in order to exist. And as the bus moves forward through that endless stillness, even the idea of time dissolves completely, not into ending, but into ongoing presence that does not require direction, explanation, or arrival. Only motion without effort, only silence without absence, only continuation that never fully stops becoming itself again. The bus begins to feel less like something moving through the world, and more like something the world is moving around. The difference no longer matters. Everything has softened into a single, continuous stillness that holds motion without ever breaking it into parts. Tom Brady exists now in a state where awareness is no longer reaching for meaning or structure. It is simply there, present, unpressured, and evenly distributed across everything that has ever been repeated enough times to become second nature. Nothing arrives as a distinct memory anymore. Everything arrives as atmosphere, and in that atmosphere even the idea of a moment fades. There is only continuation. A sideline under cold air appears again, but not as a scene, more like a sensation of standing still while everything else moves at impossible speed. The feeling of breath controlled without thinking. The feeling of attention narrowing so naturally it no longer feels like effort. Not intensity, but familiarity shaped through repetition until it no longer needs recognition. That familiarity is no longer tied to time. It exists without reference. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has reached its most complete form. There are no visible separations anymore, no edges between land and sky, no interruptions in darkness, no signals of direction or distance, only a uniform presence that stretches in every direction equally. Inside, the silence has become so stable, it no longer feels like silence. It feels like structure without sound, a shared stillness that fills the entire space without needing to be noticed. And within that structure, something remains quietly present, not thought, not memory, not even awareness in the usual sense, but rhythm, deep, underlying rhythm that has been built over years of repetition and no longer requires conscious maintenance to continue existing. The rhythm of preparation that never fully stops. Morning routines that begin before thought arrives. Film sessions that refine without needing discovery. Movements practiced so often they no longer feel learned, only expressed. The bus passes through another stretch where even faint light disappears completely. For a brief moment there is no visible world at all, only motion through pure absence. Inside that absence everything becomes softer still, not fading, just unshaped. There is no longer a separation between past and present in any meaningful sense. Everything exists as one continuous layer of experience that no longer divides itself into sections. A life becomes something more like a single long alignment with repetition that has never stopped unfolding. Wins and losses lose their distinction here. They both return to the same structure: preparation, return, repetition, continuity. The bus hum remains steady, blending so completely into perception that it no longer registers as sound. It becomes part of the same field of stillness that defines the entire interior space. Inside, the passengers are fully settled now, no longer shifting, no longer adjusting. Even sleep feels like it is arriving without effort, not as an event, but as a gradual loosening of everything that still holds attention. And in that loosening, identity becomes even less defined, not erased, just no longer separate from motion itself. A life built through repetition does not end when activity stops. It continues a structure that persists beneath every quiet moment that follows. It carries forward through stillness, through silence, through every space where nothing appears to be happening. The bus follows a gentle curve in the road, and even that movement is absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing interrupts the flow, nothing stands apart from it, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has softened into a single ongoing presence, where thought no longer forms into language, only into quiet awareness that does not require shape to exist. And as the bus moves further into that vast, unbroken stillness, even the sense of time dissolves completely, not into ending, but into an ongoing state that neither begins nor concludes. Only presence carried forward, only silence that continues, only motion that never stops being motion. The bus no longer feels like it is travelling anywhere at all. It feels like it is simply continuing inside something already infinite, something that does not change as it moves through it. The road, the night, the distance between places, none of it holds separation anymore. Everything has merged into one quiet, unbroken field of motion. Tom Brady remains in a state where awareness has stopped trying to define itself through memory or thought. There is only presence now, steady, unstructured, and soft at the edges. Nothing arrives as a distinct moment anymore. Everything exists as continuation without segmentation, and in that continuation, even memory loses its need for form. It does not replay, it dissolves into feeling. A stadium tunnel appears again, but not as a place or time. It feels like a threshold that has been crossed so many times it no longer has a beginning or an end. The quiet before stepping forward, the subtle narrowing of attention that does not require effort anymore, the sense that everything is already aligned before anything begins. But even that sense has softened. It no longer signals anticipation, only familiarity. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has become fully uniform. There are no visible changes in landscape, no separation of sky and ground, no sense of distance being covered. Only an endless continuity of darkness that carries everything equally without distinction. Inside, the silence has reached its deepest form, not absence, not presence, but equilibrium between both. And within that equilibrium, something remains gently active beneath everything else. Not thought, not effort, not even awareness in the usual sense, but rhythm, deep, embedded rhythm that has been shaped through years of repetition and now continues without needing to be held. The rhythm of preparation that exists even when preparation is not happening. The rhythm of discipline that continues even when there is nothing to discipline. The rhythm of return that never fully stops returning. The bus passes through a stretch where even faint traces of light disappear completely. For a moment, there is no visible world outside at all, only motion through uninterrupted absence. Inside that absence, everything becomes even more softened, not disappearing, just no longer formed. There is no longer a distinction between events, no separation between past and present, no structure dividing experience into parts. Everything exists as a single continuous layer that no longer needs to be organized to be understood. A life shaped by repetition becomes, in this state, something simpler, a sustained alignment with continuity itself. The bus hum blends fully into the silence now, indistinguishable from it. It does not stand apart as sound. It is part of the same field that fills the entire space. The passengers remain still, suspended in a shared quiet that feels neither like rest nor wakefulness, but something between both. And in that shared suspension, identity becomes even softer, not lost, but no longer separate from the rhythm that shaped it. A life built through repetition does not conclude when action ends. It continues through the structure that repetition has created. It remains present in every still moment that follows, unchanged in its foundation, still quietly active beneath everything. The bus gently follows another subtle curve in the road, and even that movement is absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing interrupts, nothing breaks, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has dissolved into a single ongoing presence, where thought no longer needs to form in order to exist. And as the bus continues forward through that vast, unbroken stillness, even the idea of time disappears completely, not into ending, but into something that simply continues without beginning, without conclusion, and without effort. Only motion that never stops being motion. Only silence that never becomes empty. only presence that carries itself forward endlessly without ever needing to arrive. The bus moves now with a kind of quiet inevitability, as if motion itself has stopped being an action and become a condition. The road outside no longer offers resistance or direction. It simply exists as something continuous, something that does not need to be understood to be followed. Tom Brady is no longer tracing memory at all. There is no longer a sense of looking back or forward. Everything has softened into a single, uninterrupted awareness, where even identity feels like something gently held, not something actively defined. And in that stillness what remains is no longer memory. It is residue of repetition. A sideline under fading stadium light returns, but without detail, without sequence. Only the feeling of standing in a place where everything is already known through repetition, not discovery. The controlled breath before action, the narrowing of attention that does not require effort because it has been lived too many times to feel new. But even that feeling has lost its edges. It no longer signals anticipation, only familiarity that has dissolved into background presence. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has become absolute in its uniformity. There are no visible divisions anymore, no landmarks, no horizons, no contrast between distance and nearness. Only uninterrupted continuity stretching in every direction equally. Inside, the silence has become so complete that it no longer feels like silence. It feels like structure without sound. A shared stillness that fills every part of the space evenly, without weight, without pressure. And within that structure, something remains gently present beneath everything else. Not thought, not memory, not even awareness as something active, but rhythm, deep, unbroken rhythm that has been formed over years of repetition and now continues without needing attention to sustain it. The rhythm of preparation that exists even when nothing is being prepared. The rhythm of discipline that continues even when nothing demands it. The rhythm of return that has no clear beginning or end. The bus passes through another stretch where all external light disappears completely. For a brief moment there is no visible world at all, only motion through pure absence. Inside that absence, everything becomes even softer, not dissolving, just no longer formed into separable pieces. There is no longer a distinction between events or moments, no separation between past and present, no structure dividing experience into before and after. Everything exists as a single continuous field that does not require definition to remain complete. A life built through repetition, in this state no longer appears as a sequence. It appears as continuity itself. The bus hum blends fully into that continuity, no longer distinguishable from silence. It becomes part of the same field that fills the entire interior space. The passengers remain still, suspended in a shared state that feels neither like rest nor wakefulness, but something between both that no longer needs classification. And in that shared suspension, identity becomes even more indistinct, not lost, just no longer separate from rhythm, from motion, from continuity itself. A life shaped by repetition does not end when action ends. It continues as structure that persists beneath stillness. It remains active in every quiet moment that follows, unchanged in its foundation, still quietly present even when nothing appears to be happening. The bus follows a gentle, almost imperceptible curve in the road, and even that movement is absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing interrupts, nothing breaks, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has softened into a single ongoing presence, where thought no longer forms into language, only into awareness that does not require shape. And as the bus moves further into that vast, unbroken stillness, even the idea of time dissolves completely, not into ending, but into something that simply continues without beginning, without conclusion, and without effort. Only motion that never stops unfolding. Only silence that never empties. only presence that carries itself forward endlessly without ever needing to arrive. And in that endless continuation, everything becomes quiet enough to simply remain. The bus now feels like it is moving inside something immeasurable, something that no longer behaves like space, but like quiet continuity itself. The road outside no longer separates distance into sections. It simply exists as an ongoing presence, gently carrying motion without resistance or interruption. Tom Brady is no longer engaging with memory in any structured way. There is no longer a sense of recalling or reflecting. Everything has softened into a state where experience no longer needs to be organized to be understood. It simply exists, evenly spread across awareness, without urgency or direction. And in that softness, even memory loses its boundaries. It becomes atmosphere once again. A stadium tunnel returns, not as a place, but as a sensation that has been lived so many times it no longer belongs to any specific moment. The quiet compression before stepping forward, the narrowing of attention that happens without effort, the feeling that everything is already aligned before anything begins. But even that alignment no longer carries anticipation, only familiarity without edge. The bus continues forward, and outside the night has reached complete uniformity. There are no longer visible distinctions, no horizon, no landmarks, no variation in darkness, only a continuous field of stillness extending in every direction equally. Inside, the silence has settled into its most stable form, not empty, not full, just even, and within that evenness, something remains quietly present beneath everything else. Not thought, not memory, not awareness as an active process, but rhythm, deep, underlying rhythm formed through years of repetition and now continuing without needing to be held or directed. The rhythm of preparation that exists even when nothing is being prepared. The rhythm of discipline that continues even when nothing demands it. The rhythm of return that has no beginning and no end. The bus passes through a stretch where even the faintest traces of light disappear completely. For a brief moment, there is no visible world at all, only motion through uninterrupted absence. Inside that absence, everything becomes even more softened, not dissolving, just no longer formed into separable structure. There is no longer distinction between moments, no separation between past and present, no boundary between events. Everything exists as a single continuous field of experience that does not require segmentation to remain whole. A life shaped by repetition no longer appears as sequence. It appears as continuity itself. The bus hum blends fully into that continuity now, no longer distinguishable from silence. It becomes part of the same feel that fills the entire space. The passengers remain in stillness so complete it feels like suspension rather than rest or sleep. And in that suspension, identity becomes even more indistinct, not lost, just no longer separate from rhythm, from motion, from the ongoing structure of repetition itself. A life built through repetition does not end when action ends. It continues as structure that persists beneath stillness. It remains active in every quiet moment that follows, unchanged in its foundation, still present even when nothing appears to be happening. The bus follows a subtle curve in the road, and even that movement is absorbed instantly into continuity. Nothing interrupts, nothing breaks, only continuation remains. Outside, the night holds everything without distinction. Inside, everything has softened into a single ongoing presence, where thought no longer needs to form into language, only into quiet awareness that does not require shape. And as the bus moves further into that vast unbroken stillness, even the idea of time dissolves completely, not into ending, but into something that simply continues without beginning, without conclusion, and without effort. Only motion that never stops unfolding, only silence that never becomes empty, only presence that carries itself forward endlessly, without ever needing to arrive, and in that endless continuation, everything finally settles into a quiet that does not fade, it simply remains.